journalist with CUTV Montreal, and I'm here with Niall Ricardo from Independent Jewish Voices. Niall,
I'm doing good given the circumstances, but still, and thank you for inviting me on.
thank you for being here. So I understand that Independent Jewish Voices recently put out a statement calling for a ceasefire and economic change in Palestine-Israel. Um, could you tell me a little bit about what calling for a ceasefire entails, and what does tangible change in the region look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Independent Jewish Voices put out a statement a few days ago talking about obviously the events of the past few days in Israel and Palestine. And of course, this is not something new. I mean, we've been asking for a lot of things over the years that I think that if they were respected, we wouldn't be in the situation that we are right now. But one of those things was obviously a ceasefire in the current context. A ceasefire must be understood as something that is not just, uh, the ceasefire, which would be stopping the conflict right now and basically stopping the bombing and all of that of Gaza. But going beyond that, I think that if we want to go towards a durable peace in the Middle East, in Palestine and in Israel, we have to really think about the long term. What does a ceasefire mean long term? And I mean, for that, that means stopping the oppression and the violence that Palestinians have been under on a daily basis, especially I mean since 1948 we can say, but especially in the past year where a Palestinian died on a daily basis for the past year under this extreme right wing government of Benjamin Netanyahu. But I mean. All throughout the history of this conflict, Palestinians have been the main victims, and a lot of Palestinians have suffered at the hands of the Israeli. And we're not scared to say that at Independent Jewish Voices, the apartheid state and the apartheid regime that is being imposed on Palestinians. So, I mean, obviously, in that statement, we for us any innocent civilian life that is lost is to be condemned. That is for sure. But it can't be one-sided. It can't be just condemning the deaths of innocent Israeli citizens, which horrible, horrendous what happened. And as the Jewish community, we were all shocked, of course, all in a state of shock. And I think beyond being Jewish or Muslim, everybody was shocked, about what happened. But at the same time, hopefully that people will not lose their sense of humanity in this, and understand that humans are also dying in Gaza right now. They're also children, women, elderly that are dying right now in Gaza.
Thank you. You know, if a ceasefire is actually made, and we go back to peace negotiations, whatever that looks like, I mean, this has happened countless times again, where, you know, from either side, there, there's bombing, there's things going on, and once a ceasefire called and done, um, it doesn't seem that any progress is. So if a ceasefire is called, how do we kind of create tangible change, especially in the case of the international community is only really reacting once, bombs are sometimes on Gaza at large amounts, but also bombs launched on Israel.
Yeah, we have to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. And I think that that is the first part of this. Um, Obviously, there's certain Palestinian actors that don't want to be at peace negotiations. Obviously, those actors, will not necessarily be part of the solution. But the majority of Palestinian actors have tried for decades to be part of the solution, to have a negotiated peace. And Benjamin Netanyahu among others, obviously Ben Gvir, and we can think about a bunch of other of his ministers that have said absolutely abhorrent things, dehumanizing things about the Palestinians, not just now, but for decades, are not part of the solution. So obviously Hamas is not part of the solution, but we have to question ourselves about, is Benjamin Netanyahu part of the solution? And can Benjamin Netanyahu even ensure the security of Israeli citizens? That's one of the things he has said time and time again, right? That the most important thing is to ensure the security of Israeli citizens. Well, under his watch, it's been the biggest blood stain in Israeli history on under his government, right? Under a government that has pushed literally, it pushed into the West Bank. We saw what they did in Jenin. We saw what they did at Al-Aqsa Mosque. We saw what they were doing in East Jerusalem. We saw what they were doing in Gaza, time and time again. So I think that if we are to go towards peace, we need actors that are actively promoting peace on both sides. So that has to be on the Israeli side, as it has to be on the Palestinian side. The Palestinian side have always said that they were open to peace. The majority of the Palestinian resistance is peaceful. The majority of the Palestinian resistance tries to use methods that were used against apartheid South Africa, and they're shut down. BDS, we say that BDS is anti-Semitic. Um, there was the Gaza flotilla a few years ago. How did Israel meet that flotilla? They killed people. They went on those boats, unarmed protesters that were trying to break the blockade against Gaza, that were met with bullets. A few years back in 2018, Gazans went to the border fence. Every Friday they were protesting, called the Grand March of Return, or the Big March of Return, where they were asking peacefully to exit Gaza. And what did we do? What did Israelis do under the cover of the West? Nobody said anything about that at the time. They killed 200 innocent Palestinians at the border. Absolutely atrocious. So I think my message to everybody today, and this is because seeing the images, harrowing images that we have seen the past few days, um, just in Gaza and in Israel, of so many people suffering, so many people with their families obliterated, their children abducted, killed, people looking for missing family members, is unequal unequal concern. Asymmetric condemnation will not bring peace. Asymmetric rage against the loss of human life will not bring us closer to peace. So, if we want peace, and that's absolutely what we want in IGV, and that's absolutely what we have been trying to do in the past since the start of our of IGV, is to understand that the security of Israelis also passes through security, justice, and peace and freedom for the Palestinian people.
Mm, thank you. Um, Canada, take a look at the normalization of the occupation. Canada sent more than $20 million towards to Israel, so just last year. And the year before, Canada sent more than 600 in weapons. This includes bomb cells, other explosive devices. How can we seek occupation when our own country, as well as other very rich nations, are funneling growing Israel each year?
We have to stop sending weapons to Israel. That is absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And I find it incredible to think that today, on a territory such as Hamas, right, as Gaza, excuse me. No, the majority of the people in Gaza are not associated with Hamas. That was my point. And we are sending. The Americans have sent an air carrier to the Mediterranean right now. Canada has said that we are going to basically Trudeau said, we're going to send some human aid, but we have been sending weapons, and we said we would stand, with Israel no matter what. And today, apparently, last thing I saw on the news is that in a press conference, he refused to say if Israel was breaching international law. Israel has been breaching international law for decades, and we have been idle with regards to that. And not only are we idle, but we are arming Israelis and we are giving them the weapons. So, I mean, the question that I have here is a very simple one. What is absolutely um, annihilating Gaza going to bring? What is that going to resolve? What is the constant bombarding of civilian population in Gaza going to bring? Nothing. Nothing. They have basically treated Gaza like the biggest open air prison in the world since 2007. And did that prevent the tragic events of Saturday? No, it didn't. They have the most sophisticated security system in the world. They literally have AI face recognition. They have some of the most high tech security apparatus in the world that they actually export. It's one of Israel's big industries. They export across the world. We've seen a bunch of scandals with phone tapping, etc., apps like that that were created in Israel, and that did not make Israel more secure. That did not prevent, innocent Israeli citizens from being murdered, like we saw on Saturday. And no matter how many lives they want to extract from Palestine, no matter how much hardship they want the Palestinians through, Palestine is not going to cease to exist. And that's something that the Israeli government has to understand. And that's something that we in Canada have to understand, but not just understand and not just say it, not just give lip service to it. We have to actually allow for justice, freedom, and a viable future for Palestinians, it be in Gaza and the West Bank. So, with regards to the weapons, I mean, this is not going to be resolved by more bullets or more bombs. And at this point, I think what Canada should be doing is trying to get Israel to de escalate immediately, to stop the bombing of civilian zones, and to try to get both sides and the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, sides that have wanted to negotiate for peace and get them to the table. Also, just on that, I think it's very important to note it can't be a humiliating peace for the Palestinians. It can't be the peace that we saw, that the peace plan, quote unquote, air marks, peace plan that Trump drew up for Palestine, which was absolutely humiliating for the Palestinian people. That's not peace. Humiliation is not peace.
It seems that through the actions from it, the goal seems to be completely wipe out, and it that also Canada does like both sides. I mean, it's very obvious politicians in power especially are very focused on siding with Israel, you know, their right to defend them, sending ongoing exports. Well, in 2021, after the, the almost 2 week bombing of sent large money to Gaza to build it, and that we're almost, how do I say this? Um, we're just kind of wasting our own money trying to supply peace and, at the same time arm. Uh, is there something that you would like to say, I guess, to just show if you have the opportunity to
Uh,
identify?
Absolutely. It serves no purpose whatsoever to take a knee at Black Lives Matter protests and to say that we're working towards reconciliation in Canada when we're supporting a regime of apartheid in Israel and Palestine. Like, and that goes for Justin Trudeau, and that goes for all of the progressives that are progressive on every single issue except Israel and Palestine, except Palestine. That stand in solidarity with, and as they should, trans, queer, LGBTQ, indigenous, racialized, and fight maybe even against Islamophobia here. But then they don't realize that though those same tactics of Islamophobia, those same tactics of dehumanization, the same tactics of what we deemed absolutely historically unacceptable, right? Jim Crow in the South, apartheid in South Africa, are being used in Israel and Palestine. So, what I would say to Justin Trudeau is what is about to happen in Gaza with a military invasion, a massacre probably of, and it's difficult to say this, of absolutely gigantic proportions, is going to be a stain forever on Canada's conscience. It's going to be a stain forever on the legacy he leaves. And Justin Trudeau, in terms of international relations, has not left a great legacy, I must say. But I was talking in another interview earlier today, about the fact that it's actually during um, a conflict between several Arab nations and Canada and Israel, excuse me, back in the 60s, that Canada drew up the idea under Pearson of peacekeepers. Uh, and that's something we pride ourselves in Canada about, that we were behind peacekeepers and that Canada played a role to bring people to the negotiating table and to ensure that, again, there was a peace that could be sustainable. Now, obviously, as we look further on, I mean, that did not prevent Israel from invading Lebanon several times in the 80s and early 2000s. But we have to ask ourselves as a country, um, what what is our role in the world, and our role must not to give cover to war crimes. Also, if we're denouncing war crimes in Ukraine, as we should, 100%. And I've been on the show and I've talked about this before. But we cannot not denounce war crimes in it by committed by Israel. We can't cherry pick the war crimes we're comfortable with and the war crimes we're not comfortable with. And when we look at how it was almost impossible, right, for the West to rally support around Ukraine unanimously within the global South, outside of the West, we have to look at situations like this. What message are we sending to people in the global South when we say we have to, condemn without any caveats what happened to Israeli citizens? Uh, Absolutely, innocent citizens, absolutely. But we say buts about the Palestinians. But you know, whatever's happening in Gaza, Hamas this, Hamas that, right? So that is what I have to say to the Canadian political class in general. And what I have to say to progressives right now is the time to be courageous. It's not being courageous to say you're pro-Palestinian when nothing's happening in Palestine. It's not courageous to say you're pro-Palestinian when the pressure is not up, right? When the heat in the kitchen is pretty low, right? Um, Martin Luther King said it: the measurement of a person is not within times of great times. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's in times of stress, of pressure, of where we apply that pressure. And so, yes, there's been a lot of you have to condemn. You have to condemn what happened Saturday. Of course, absolutely condemn what happened Saturday. But to give the context about it, to say that this did not happen in a vacuum, that there is a whole history to what happened. Israel has bombed and absolutely created an impasse for Palestinians who literally say in almost every interview they're just waiting for the moment to die. Like, I don't think people understand. what that feels like to live in a place where you were born and probably, you're alive now. It's almost been, how many years. There's children that have never seen anything else than what Israel has imposed, the most inhumane blockade actually that exists right now in the world. And they say they're waiting for death. So if people don't stand up now, then the solidarity that you had for the Palestinian cause was performative. And I think that that is important to say.
Thank you. We've talked a little bit about the normalization by the West, but I want to talk a little bit normalization in the East as well. Um, in mainstream media, there's been a headline when discussing the events of Saturdays. It was unprovoked kind of language, but recently, been meeting Arab leaders of Arab continue normalization. Has this contributed to reasons in Gaza by resistances?
I mean, I don't want to speculate too much on what pushed Hamas to commit the war crimes and just the killing of civilians. But I will say this: when there is no people were surprised Saturday morning. It's almost if they woke up and I'm saying this and I'm laughing, but it's actually very very sad that there was a conflict in Israel and Palestine. Right? There's been a conflict for forever, and so the fact that there was normalization first with the Emirates, and then after that we with Morocco, and then or before I forget the chronology exactly, and then now there was tentative talks with Saudi Arabia. I mean, the issue here is that and Rashid Khalili, who's a prof at New York. I think the chair of Edward Said Studies, Arab Studies, said this very, very eloquently on Democracy Now! A few days ago, where he said they tried to create this artificial reality where you could just basically forget about Palestine, where the Middle East was going to be an oasis of peace, and the Palestinians were going to keep living in the biggest open air cage in the world. And that obviously is not sustainable. And that obviously created the situation where if your back is absolutely up against the wall, if the people that are oppressing you, that have imposed an inhumane blockade, literally say that one, as a people, you do not exist. That was the comments of one of Netanyahu's ministers. They support the open killing because we talk a lot about denouncing terrorism in the last few days. I'm all for that. Let's denounce Jewish terrorism too. Let's denounce the settler terrorism in the West Bank, right? And so when you're putting people, it's so one-sided. It's so one-sided. You create so much frustration. You basically send the message that your lives are disposable and they're not important. Obviously, you're going to create a reaction, and that reaction is obviously nothing any of us would have wanted. But we have been trying to say in IGV for years, that the security of Palestinians means the security of Israelis. That freedom and justice and peace for Palestine means freedom and justice and peace for Israelis. And a member of the Knesset of Hadash, I think, the Communist Party in Israel, said something also very interesting, where he said, "Well, basically, uh, this fault, that everything that happened in the past few days, like, is Netanyahu's fault. It is provoked by him, and unless we ensure mutual security for both, then we're endangering Israel." And I mean, this is something, and I'll finish this comment on this. This is something that is not, only, wokes and leftists talking about this. Ariel Sharon, who was Israel's prime minister and who actually decided in 2015 to evacuate, in 2005 to evacuate Gaza and to give Gaza back to the Palestinians, in a move that shocked a lot of the international community. Um, I remember being young and seeing um, settlers being taken out of Gaza and them throwing rocks at Israeli police and military, and it being, a huge event, right, within Israel, that we were actually giving back Gaza to the Palestinians and taking out Israeli settlers, which meant basically demolishing Israeli settlements within Gaza. Ariel Sharon was a hawk. He was somebody who was against, for example, spoke out against the Oslo Accords at one point. I think rallied maybe to them more at the end, but he was not somebody. He was also a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's own party, Likud, and he was one of the highest up military officials within the country for decades, decades. Um, he understood, like a lot of people within the Israeli intelligence and the Israeli military, that a continual occupation of Palestinian land is, one, not sustainable, two, not feasible, and three, endangers and is an existential danger for Israel. So right now, when we talk about all of these things, security and all of that, well, we have to really look at what does security mean. It's easy to talk about security, but what does security mean? When the United States, and I'll just finish on that, when the United States went into Iraq, right? Uh, Absolutely tragic, obviously, what happened in Iraq, and absolute failure what happened in Afghanistan. They can retreat back into the American borders like they did. Where does Israel retreat if they see a defeat? Where do they retreat? They can't, right? So I'm sick and tired of hearing people say that I don't care about Jewish lives in Israel. I do. I absolutely do. 100%. And I care enough to say that the only solution is peace, and the only solution is the end of the occupation.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. Lastly, I just wanted to speak on anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has been a long time, and there's been cases of anti-Semitism, around the movement. Recently I saw a case of horrific anti-Semitism in Australia at a rally. Um, Cases like this are used to Palestinian activism and anti-Semitic as a whole. Um, that this is occurring and does shut down the progressing to tangible to generate
Yeah, so I don't know the exact case in Israel. I do know that there has been, obviously, in any situation like this, there is anti-Semitism that arises, which is absolutely, terrible and absolutely unjustified. I mean, the first thing that is very important to distinguish is anti-Semitism. I mean, Judaism is not Zionism, and being Jewish does not equate with supporting Israel, and I think that is very important. And I think it's a tightrope to walk on when you're Jewish and you support the Palestinian cause, because a lot of people will say, well, if you're Jewish and you're supporting the Palestinian cause, you're either a self-hating Jew or you're giving cover to anti-Semites. And that is absolutely wrong, because the majority of the Palestinian movement and the crushing majority of the Palestinian movement is not anti-Semitic. Um, what is, though, anti-Semitic, and I think it's important to say, is to equate Jews with Israel, or to say that to use anti-Semitic tropes when with regards to Israel, to basically say that Israel, uh, controls and Jews because they control the world. Israel is untouchable, etc., etc. That is absolutely and does not help the cause. On the other side, it's interesting to see that any form of for me of racialization, any form of discrimination tends to try to create this homogeneous block, right? A monolithic block of these are what Jews are, these are what Arabs are, these are what blacks are, right? And we do that a lot on both sides, right? If you're Jewish, you have to denounce, you have to stand with Israel no matter what, right? And you get that in the media a lot. I sometimes am bothered with how much attention IJV gets. I have to be honest, because it seems for a lot of people like being Jewish and denouncing Israel is something that is so unnatural that we just have to talk about it. So we get on the spotlight a lot, and I guess that's a good thing because I get to pass this message, right, of peace and justice and freedom for the Palestinian people. But at the same time, we shouldn't be surprised, and more Jews today are coming towards that, especially in the younger generations, with regards to understanding that you can't, go to a Black Lives Matter protest, put your knee down, and then the next minutes support the bombing of Gaza. Um, you can't say land back and all children matter and denounce what happened, the absolutely terrible genocide that happened in residential schools in this country, and at the same time allow Palestinian children to not have adequate education, access to healthcare, access to education, access to such basic things as water and food now and electricity. And I think that for me, being Jewish means understanding what our people went through um, for millennia, understanding that any minority goes through different forms of discrimination, and that those struggles have to be united. That if a mosque is vandalized here in Quebec, then that endangers Jews too. And if sexual minorities are targeted by extreme far right, well, that endangers us too, because they're not going to stop and they're not going to cherry pick which minority they like. And just to finish on that, um, I would like to say that, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu is one of the biggest supporters of anti Semites across the world. Um, Donald Trump had unwavering support from Benjamin Netanyahu. I remember a few years back when the pogrom at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh happened, and it was the worst terrorist attack against Jews in American history up until that point. And I think now, I hope so, and I hope so for the future that we'll never ever see such tragic loss of life again in North America within our community. But uh, Trump was saying in the lead up to that George Soros was basically puppeteering the refugee caravan that was coming up from the south. I mean, the most anti-Semitic trope ever. A rich guy that's puppeteering a rich Jew. Let's say things as they are, that are puppeteering, you know, this crisis. And not only was he being racist against migrants, he was also being racist against Jews. And Jews are cosmopolites, so they're globalists, so they're behind all of this, right? And Benjamin Netanyahu, after the massacre at the synagogue Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, sent congratulations to Donald Trump. Netanyahu invited Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, ex-president of Brazil, thank God, to Israel, and in that and right before that visit in Israel, his minister of I think it was of communications or something like that. Anyways, one of the ministers within his cabinet uh, was found basically copying one of Goebbels' speeches. So a Nazi, the minister of Nazi communication, he literally copy pasted what Goebbels had used in one of his speeches. Orban in Hungary is one of Netanyahu's biggest allies. So I think it's about time to stop equating Israel and Israeli politics and supporting Israel or defending Israel, or whatever the hell that means, when we're supporting somebody who doesn't care about Jewish lives outside of Israel, that is ready to put his political career, and we've seen that time and time again, in front of democracy, in front of justice in Israel, and to put the endangered lives of Jews around the world for minor political gains in Israel. So I think that, yeah, if we're going to talk about anti-Semitism, we have to talk about that too.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anything that I didn't ask you would like to share that you think is important for mind as the media news site?
I think that it's important for people not to be intimidated now. More than ever, it's important for people not to be intimidated, and it's important for people to stand with their values. I think it's important for people to refuse the binary that is trying to be imposed on people. Some of our watchers and maybe people at Concordia are too young to remember 9/11. I was very young when 9/11 happened, but I remember the hysteria after 9/11 that lasted for years. And I remember how much horrendous stuff happened after that. And that literally really uh, shaped my whole political upbringing. War in Iraq and Afghanistan. Uh, we're talking about almost 3 million dead in Iraq, if I'm not mistaken. Some people talk about 3 million dead. Some say it's less, but you know, hundreds of thousands for sure. Um, and so now we is really the time to be courageous. Now is really the time to stand on those principles, to show people that the principles that you espouse are not just aesthetics, that they are much more than that, and to realize that at the end of the day, absolutely, I feel 100% for all of the victims in Israel. I feel for all the families that are in mourning, that are grieving, and that are losing, that lost loved ones. And there's still probably going to be more news in the next days of unfortunately of people that lost their lives on the Israeli side. Um, but nothing justifies, just like nothing justified that, nothing justifies what's happening to Gaza now. And what we have to realize is um, Gazans are going through the worst assault in their history. They are now blocking off electricity, water, and food. They are imposing a medieval age siege on Gaza that will have absolutely terrible consequences. And we have to have compassion, just like we have compassion with Israeli victims. We have to have compassion with Palestinian victims, and not just that. We have to. It's not enough to talk about it. It's not enough to share it in social media. It's not enough to try to have debates. Those are important, to give pushback, to share all of that, to amplify Palestinian voices. But what we have to do now is to go in those streets and make sure that we're heard, and make sure that we show up for Palestinians in this moment of need. They need our solidarity more than ever, and we can't let down now. We can't be intimidated now. Thank you for having me on, and thanks for having these debates, and thanks for CUTV giving us a voice. Thank you.